لما بدا يتثنى لما
My story, okay, in the beginning it was very suffering. I'm living with my family and I love my family too much, and I afraid about them. It's too much. When the war starting, okay, the Syrian army is entered to my village. Someday, my old son Muhammad, he's detained for 40 days. Just 40 days. We spent it, it was, very difficult for us. When my old son Muhammad, from this time, I decided to go outside. When Muhammad released from prison, okay, we left to Lebanon. Just stay, about 2 years there. But we stay too near from Syrian border. But every day, Syrian army, they shot us by bombing, and also from that time I decide to go out of Lebanon. But it's very difficult for me. I try from time to time to ask how we can go outside, Just make, 5 interview with me. And last one, Alhamdulillah, they told me, Mr. Dandashi, we transfer your file to Canadian Embassy. You will go on 29 May. You are traveling, your flight. Really, it's not, incredible, in that time, we can feel, with my family. Jawad, he was dancing, and my family, she smiled, and it was, like wedding, and you will not believe me, when we arrived to Montreal, they responsible about me for everything. We will not pay anything. Okay, they rent this home for us. I will do my best just only to improve my French language, just only to thanks the people who's helped me here. I'm really like to thank, and to say something, for Canadian government, and for Canadian people, just only to say thanks for you. You opened my life again. I lost everything, but now we have, a new life for my people, for my son, okay? They will complete studying here. That's what I'm really looking for my son, okay? To be good Canadian citizen, okay? Muhammad, I think he will be a successful engineer in the future, and Canada, it will be, proud of Muhammad. They paid everything for us, okay? It's good for me, but what about the other people there in Syria, or Lebanese, Lebanon? No help. No help. No help to them. I'm very happy. But what about the other people? Not enough for me if I am happy, but what about the other people there? This is the problem. Must try government of Canada to help people in Syria, and in Lebanon. If it's possible, just only to talk with immigration, why not try to help the people there? Because my country has need to helping really, They are suffering, people there. Syrian, it's very, very beauty country, and the people, Syrian people, I think, how we can explain to you, why not living like other people? Why is war in my country? I think we should try. I think immigration of any country, not only Canada, I mean, I wish, from any country, just try to help my people. And Syrian is war, and too much people died, and too much prisoners there, and why not try to help? Must be help people, but nobody take care. Canada, they promise us, okay, they bring, 1,000 or two,
200,
yeah,
1,000.
200, but till now it's not, just only about 15 family. It's not enough. They promise they will bring, but not come yet any people from there. I don't know why.
My name is Faisal Al-Azam. I'm the director of the Syrian Canadian Council in Montreal. I'm also part of the board of directors of an organization called the Syrian Kids Foundation. I'm a Canadian citizen, originally from Syria, Damascus, and have arrived in Canada, Montreal in 2002. I've been quite active in the last 4 years for the Syrian cause, doing a lot of advocacy work, fundraisers as well, and trying to make the voices of the people heard, at least here in Canada.
So my name is Paul Clark. I'm the executive director of a non-governmental organization called Action Refugee Montréal. We've been in existence for about 20 years. So our role is to help refugees in different ways. We have a program where we visit people who are at the Immigration Holding Center in Laval. We have a twinning program. We have a refugee sponsorship program and an advocacy program.
There's two aspects. The first one is the financial aid. I think in terms of financial aid, Canada is doing quite well in terms of the response. I think they've contributed approximately $300 million towards the Syrian refugee crisis. The issue is, and I've told the officials that in the past, is that the money is going to government. So for example, the Jordanian government. And when you go to the refugee camps inside Syria and compare to what's in Jordan and Turkey and in Lebanon, there is no comparison of how disastrous it is inside Syria. I mean, inside Syria, this is where the vulnerability is really, and this is where it is really hell. They lack everything. I do not see international NGOs going inside Syria and helping. And there is good reason for that. If you go inside Syria, there is a risk of being bombarded by the regime, by the air or by barrel bombs. And now you have the danger of ISIS. So international NGOs just don't want to deal with these territories. And what's happening is that governments are helping other governments, but that's just one side of the response. And we have to remember is that to date, we have approximately 9 to 10 million refugees, Syrian refugees. Almost 50% of the Syrian population has been uprooted. This hasn't been seen since the creation of the UN, is that in 4 years you have half of a population displaced. 7 million internally displaced. Those are the ones that I don't see international NGOs coming to rescue. And then you have 2.5 million to 3 million externally displaced. So this is where the government of Canada and other nations are helping out. So they're helping out either the Jordanian, Lebanese, or Turkish government. So that's one side of it. The second side of it, which I have been very critical, is the amount of refugees that we've taken into Canada. And this is a very important topic, especially when you're a Syrian Canadian. If you talk to any Syrian Canadian today and ask him, what's your number one anxiety? He will tell you, the well-being of my family. I'm trying to bring them here, but I can't. Visas refused, student permits refused, family reunification refused. Why? Because the visa officer, when he refuses, doubts that that person, when he arrives to Canada, will leave at the end of his visa, because he knows that his source country is a mess and it's a disaster. So this has created a lot of anxiety. We did a lot of lobbying towards the government of Canada and the Ministry of Immigration. And finally, they announced that they will take 1,300 refugees out of these 3 million. And what's interesting is that 200 are government resettled, which means that the government itself will pay and will take on the expenses. So it's assisted refugee program, government assisted refugee program, and 1,100 through private sponsorship. So we're like, okay, what is this private sponsorship program? We've never heard of it.
The Syrian crisis has modified our sponsorship program such that it's much higher. We're actually going to submit over 60 files this year, so 4 times what we normally do. Sponsorship means that someone, a Syrian, say in Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, wherever, has to be determined by the Canadian Immigration Department that they meet the definition of a convention refugee. That is, that they are persecuted or likely to be persecuted because of their religion, their nationality, membership in a social group, their political opinions, etc. And so you have to meet that definition. Luckily, right now, almost every Syrian meets that definition, so that's helpful in that sense. A further difficulty is, by definition, if we go back to who is a refugee and they're persecuted or they fear persecution, they must be out of their country. And we get a lot of phone calls about Syrians who are still in Syria because their home is still intact. Yes, the war is coming close to them. Yes, they fear, but they've been here all their life, etc. There's nothing we can do for anybody who's still staying in the country. And we know there are millions of what we call internally displaced Syrians. That is, they've left their home, they're still within the borders, so they are not eligible for the refugee sponsorship file at all. The second is there has to be somebody here who is going to take care of all their financial needs for 12 months after they arrive. So, as an example, one individual person is $7,000. A couple with a couple of young children is $13,000. So the way it works is we need to have that money from the sponsor. We put it in the bank account, we segregate it. When the refugees arrive in due course, we give that money back over 1 year. And that can be a problem. Not everybody has $11,000 or $25,000 sitting in their bank account. Nevertheless, some people have the money. So then we have to do all the paperwork, so we have to be in touch somehow with the person who's in a refugee situation, typically via email. Then we send all this paperwork to the provincial government, who sends it to the federal government, who sends it overseas. So guess what? There's delays. Then you have to wait for the refugee to be interviewed by a visa officer wherever they are. And around the globe, the delays before you actually get that interview can be very long. For instance, Jordan right now is officially about 25 months. Moscow, as another example, is about 42 months. Tel Aviv is 31 months. Nairobi is 52 months. So it's many, many years.
So the combination of all these criteria made that I know very, very few people that went ahead with the program. And as a consequence, after 4 years, I don't think that the number of refugees, Syrian refugees in Canada has surpassed 200. So the government resettled ones are here, but through private sponsorship, very, very few. And as a consequence, Canada is one of the least countries that have welcomed Syrian refugees. And then when you approach the government about these things, first they deflect by telling you, well, they can privately sponsor. But then you tell them about the obstacles. Well, yes, it's not just for Syrians, it's for everyone. We know that the system is not perfect, etc., etc. Yes, but in Syria there is an emergency situation right now. I don't think that there is any place that is as dangerous as Syria today. You can take the entire globe. There isn't a place as dangerous as Syria today, whether you're a journalist, a humanitarian worker, or even a regular civilian. And this is why half of the population has been displaced so fast.
news for Syrians is the federal government is putting a lot of emphasis on having those files go overseas. And so typically a file will take 6 to 9 months. It's taking about 3 months to get overseas. So that's helpful for the Syrian population. Beirut is officially 24 months, but again, the government has decided to put extra resources. And so we had some people who were interviewed this week, the second week of November, for a file we sent in May. So that's 6 months. That is miraculously short. Now, if you've got bombs coming around you and you're in a terrible situation, every day is long. But compared to Nairobi, where it's 4.5 years before you get your interview, 6 months is a pretty short time. The response so far has been, as I mentioned, it seems a little sparse to have only 200 government sponsored, but they seem to have put resources into Beirut because we're getting, we had some people came in 2 weeks ago and we only sent in the file in February. And when people were coming to sign up for sponsorship, we said, well, 2016, 2017, that's when you can expect your family to arrive. And they're here. So the Canadian government response in terms of the administration of the files we've sent in is outstanding. And I'm surprised. I'm surprised. I think it's marvelous. You know, so give the government credit for that. The government has also, from what I understand, paid or committed $650 million of humanitarian aid for people in the affected areas, Jordan, and that's marvelous.
In terms of aid, there has been a generous contribution, but it has been limited to partners that Canada views as allies. So for example, Jordan. So I think in aid there is as well a political angle to strengthening friendships. In terms to inside Syria, almost nothing has been done. In terms of receiving refugees, I think that we're not doing well at all, especially comparing to other countries and especially comparing to our history of how we reacted when there was an earthquake in Haiti, how we reacted to the Kosovo and Bosnian war, etc., etc. What are the reasons? You know, this is another topic, but you could say that in general, I think the policy regarding immigration, citizenship and refugee of the Canadian government has been changing and is changing. We're seeing that it's more difficult to acquire citizenship, easier to lose it. There's a lot of reform in the refugee program that people are not happy with. And in general, I think we need to question as well our policy towards the Middle East and how the Canadian government as well views the Middle East.
The one thing that I'll mention too, and this has got nothing to do with Syria, it just shows that if the federal government decides that it's ready to work extra hard in the sponsorship area, that people can come within a year.
So if we do a little bit of comparisons, you can take a country like Sweden that has 1/3 the population of Canada. To this day, there's 20,000 Syrian refugees there, compared to 200 here in Canada approximately. So we're speaking 100 times more, with 1/3 of the population.
And they get permanent residency, right?
And yes, and that's another point. Any Syrian that was there that has asked for asylum has been given as well permanent residency. Germany is another good example. The numbers are up there with Sweden, but they did something interesting as well. They gave 5,500 family reunification visas for Syrians that were in Germany. So if, let's say, my brother is stuck in Aleppo under bombardment, there's a visa process that has been expedited so that you can reunite with your brother in Germany, and at least on a temporary basis. Whereas what I'm seeing here in Canada is day after day, people are sending me emails. Here's the visa officer refusal. Please help. From one side, my family is stuck with ISIS. From the other side is barrel bomb. Every day, if I open my inbox, those are the emails that I get. how can I get my parents out? How can I get my brother and sister? I tried, I applied 3 times. Can you help? Can you do something about it? I'm a huge advocate of education, and especially towards Syrian refugees, because I think the Syrian refugees are going to be the people that will play the biggest role in the Syria of tomorrow. You know, I was watching an interview of the communique director of the UNHCR, and she said something that surprised me, is that the average time of a refugee is 17 years. This is a huge amount, 17 years. So imagine that these people that are living right now in camps and are displaced do not get proper education for 5, 10, 15, 17 years, and this is almost half of Syria's population. So it's not just a lost generation, it is a lost country that you're talking about. And what I've seen, at least with my eyes when I visited the region, is that in certain areas there is a positive response, but it is a very basic response, meaning that we provide tents, we provide food, and basic medical aid. Point. It stops here. There isn't any really contribution in building the refugee, pushing him towards education, pushing him to excel. But the truth is that these are the people that will come back, and these are the people that will build Syria. Those are the most important people. And this is why this is what I've been working with my colleagues, is in this foundation to really invest in education. And education, not just academic education, but as well in values. So we had people come, for example, to our school, give workshops about recycling, about democracy. As a consequence, the students right now, they have a parliament. They voted for their own parliament. This is the first time they exercise democracy in their life, etc. So I really hope that the UNHCR would have similar approach. Of course, the limitation is money. And this is where, you know, big countries are involved, because they are the financiers of the UNHCR. So to answer your question, of course, increasing aid is important. Resettlement is very important, but really investing in these refugees and investing in their minds, this is the most important contribution that we can do. Because those are the people that will go back to Syria, and those are the people that will rebuild Syria. Syrians are naturally bilingual, and some of them are trilingual. Myself, I came to this country trilingual. I didn't need to go to schools here to be able to integrate, so my integration was easy. And I'm one example of many Syrians. And it seems that, you know, it is a general approach, and I think this is those are the orders coming from the top. Is regarding Syria, take a step back. And this is being applied to politics as well. So Canada is one of the rare countries, for example, that has not recognized the Syrian opposition. So when they go to the Friends of Syria conferences, they attend as observer. They don't attend as participant. One of the least countries that are doing or have a positive response towards bringing Syrian refugees, etc. So everything is interconnected. And regarding Sweden, I mean, they have a tradition of taking refugees. Canada used to have a tradition as well in taking refugees. But in these last couple of years, it seems that all of that has changed. Now, an interesting response that I've heard often is that there is a security concern. And that's why the Canadian government does not want to expedite or do more for Syrians. But I don't think I've heard of any voice asking not to do security checks. And I question a lot the logic that our own families or families of Syrian Canadians are a security threat to Canada. And if it was a security problem for Canada, why isn't it for Germany or Sweden, for example? So the entire logic does not stand. Something interesting as well that I've heard while lobbying in Parliament is that Syria is a man-made war, and if it was a natural disaster, then our response would be different. So we distinguish between man-made war and a natural disaster. And as well, I have difficulty accepting this logic because that kid who has a barrel bomb falling on his head does not really distinguish between, a tornado or this bomb that's being thrown at him from a helicopter or an airplane. Death is death, suffering is suffering. And as well, I have problem with this logic because if I go back to Canadian history, at least the last 20, 30 years, I see a lot of refugee responses that are based on man-made violence, whether it was Bosnia or Kosovo, or even protests in Hungary in the 50s against the Soviet Union, etc. So this logic does not apply. So really, to conclude, the excuses given by the government do not stand. There are so many people that I'm noticing that are not understanding what's going on in Syria. And this has consequences as well in humanitarian aid. So if you compare how much people donated to Haiti, for example's earthquake, comparing to Syria, the figures are 10 to 15 times higher regarding Haiti, for example, because people understand the cause. But with Syria, the politics are really shadowing the real disaster, the humanitarian crisis. So each one of us has a role. Speak about Syria, speak about it on your Twitter, on your Facebook. You can contact your MP. Why am I not seeing Syrian refugees here? Why is your response so bad? And why, it's shameful. We have a tradition with refugee responses. What's going on? So if we don't take the leads, us as citizens of this country, and if we don't challenge their responses, then this is the status quo that will go on.